So today on Laments, we've got Jackie Devoy. Jackie, how are we?
I'm very well, actually. Thank you, Dean. Thank you for having me on Laments.
Not a problem. Happy to have you. Happy to have you. So, Jackie, you're an author of a book called Murdered by the State. Now, I do want to get to the book because I think that's an interesting conversation to have predominantly. But how did you fall into becoming an author? It's not, is this something that you worked at? Like, there's no degree in how to write a book at school, is there?
When I was a child, I used to write books, like reams and reams of paper, handwritten books, and just novels, and usually about, heroic girl children who did something amazing. And then I love writing at school. It's probably one of my best subjects at school, especially fictional stories. And then I had my first fictional story published, I think, when I was about early 20s in it was a magazine called Over 21. It was just a short story. And then after that, was that 1985? Yeah. I started writing fiction for teenage. No, it was earlier than 1982. I had a couple published in teenage magazines. There was a magazine called Jackie, funnily enough, and I did
Jackie, yeah.
this for them. And then I did when Just 17 came about, I worked for them a lot. I used to actually work in the office there, which was another girls' teenage magazine. I think I've written hundreds of short stories that have been published all over the world, actually. And then I got commissioned to write a series of horoscope books when that was in the 90s, and I wrote a novel, a teen novel. And then I did write another book that was about to be published by HarperCollins in 1987. But there was a recession around that time. It was 87 or 89, no, 87. And they shut the teen book department down. So yeah, that never got published. I kept the proofs for ages, but I don't know where they are now. And that was a good book, actually. I like that one. And then I wrote another adult book, but never really did anything with it. And then since then, my my horoscope books are still for sale online, and also the teenage novel is. It's called Love Games. It's been on sale and republished by loads of publishers, and I've never been paid for it. I've tried to get a lawyer to chase it up, but nothing's happened. It's still out there, nearly 20 years down the line. And then I suppose this one is the next one since then, which is a completely different type of book. It's not a novel, but it's not a typical non-fiction book either. It's very, very different. So yeah, I wouldn't say I fell into it. I kind of yeah, crawled slowly probably.
Well, I don't want to upset anyone, but I was born in 86. So you've been writing for longer than I've been around.
Yeah, yeah,
There we
pretty much.
go. That's a polite way of putting it, I'm sure.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the book that I want to talk about is by yourself called Murdered by the State. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
I can. Well, let me go back to the beginning. So in 2020, my dad was in a care home, and I found out by accident that there was a DNR in place on him in the care home, a do not resuscitate order. My dad had had a stroke in October of 2019. So, in my opinion, he was just in the care home for a bit of respite to
Hmm.
recover from the stroke, and he was recovering quite well. And then I'd take him home. Other people had other ideas, obviously. And everyone at that time, I found out, who went into a care home or indeed went into hospital, um, many people had DNRs put on them. So this was a new thing that was brought in and under all the COVID rules. Um, a do not resuscitate order basically says if your heart stops beating for whatever reason, they won't try any CPR on you. And they are supposed to get you to agree to it and supposed to discuss it with family if you haven't got capacity. But they weren't doing that in 2020. Well, they might have been doing it sometimes, but most of the time, most of the people I've spoken to, um, they weren't discussing it with families. They were putting these DNR orders on people without consent, without family permission, without anyone knowing sometimes. So I argued against it, saying my dad was only 76 at the time. He wasn't ancient. He didn't have any kind of illness. He was just recovering from the stroke. He'd had strokes before that he'd recovered fine from. And I remember talking to the care home manager there, saying, talking about when I get my dad home, and she laughed at me and she said, "Oh, you won't be going home." And I said, what do you mean you won't be going home? She said, oh no, people don't go home. She said this in front of my dad, and my dad started laughing and he said, yeah, you walk in the front door and go out the back door in a box. And she said, well, yeah, that's pretty true actually. And I said, oh, that's not going to be like that for you, Dad. I'll get you home when you're better. You know, you're not going to be in here for long. Anyway, of course, the lockdowns occurred, and he was then obviously imprisoned. And we had the window visits and all that awful stuff. And he became very, very depressed. He didn't really need to be in a care home. He just needed to be in his own house. That was another issue. He lived in a council house, so I had the council within a couple of weeks calling saying they wanted the house back. And I said, well, he's coming home soon. And they were like, no, he probably won't. And I was like, well, give him some time and we'll see how it goes. Anyway, it got to a point where the window visits were getting so depressing and so awful. My dad didn't want to use, well, he didn't lose his phone. This is something else I need to write about. People who go into hospitals and care homes invariably have property stolen from them. My dad had 3 phones go missing, lots of clothes, money, because I always used to bring him a few £10 notes because he liked to have money on him, you know. I said, you can't really spend it in the care home. But he was like, yeah, but I like to give them a tip sometimes. I'm like, they're not allowed to take a tip. But, you know, he just was one of those blokes who liked to have cash in his pocket. Any £10 notes I brought, I'd go, what do you do with those £10 notes? He's like, I don't know, they've gone missing. I put them in a book and they're not there anymore. He used to hide money in books. Yeah, so he was trapped. But anyway, I got fed up with that and decided to get him out, especially because they would not remove this DNR order. I talked about this at the time openly in articles, and I went on to David Icke's podcast. David's an old friend of mine, and he invited me on to talk about what's going on in care homes. I went on, talked about that. After that, got a lot of views there. Obviously, people started contacting me about what had happened to their loved ones in care homes. And then that extended to people telling me that their loved ones had been killed in care homes and in hospitals. And I was like, no, what do you mean? Started looking into it. More and more people were contacting me saying that their loved one had gone into hospital with after a fall, maybe, or because they had a dizzy spell, or because they just weren't feeling that great, or with a cough or anything, you know. And within a matter of a couple of days, they'd be dead. And these were people who weren't terminally ill, and many people who weren't old. You know, there's quite a few people in the support group that I set up, you know, their loved ones were, well, the youngest in their 20s, so that would be people's kids, you know, and oldest in their 90s, but plenty in their 50s and 60s. It wasn't uncommon for people to be involuntarily euthanized, which is another, it's a euphemism for murdered, in their beds. So, and then obviously being marked down as COVID deaths. So I was thinking, this is very weird. Started looking into it more and more, spoke to lots of people, found out what was going on. And it did seem to be true that people were being murdered in hospital and care homes and being listed as COVID deaths. So I obviously thought this is a way of boosting up the COVID numbers because of, in my view, there was no pandemic, there was no virus. But that aside, whether you believe that or not, these people weren't dying of a virus. They weren't dying of what we're told they were dying of. So yeah, I just thought this is weird. More and more people coming to me. So many people. I thought I need to get this into the newspapers. At the time, I was writing for the mainstream news, you know, like Daily Mail, Telegraph, that kind of thing. I did a few articles for the Telegraph on care home stuff. I did a series of articles about my dad, how depressing it was in the care home, and also an article about getting him out of the care home, which I did successfully in September 2020 after he'd been in there for 10 months. I thought, this is enough. He was like nearly in tears every time saying, why am I imprisoned? Why can't you come in? And I said, it doesn't make any sense, Dad. I know. Don't worry, I'll get you out. So I phoned the care home and said to have my dad ready the next day at 3 p.m.
Yeah.
And amazingly, they did. They had him outside in his wheelchair. Because he had no exercise. He could barely walk, you know, he'd just been stuck in that room for nearly 10 months. So took him back to his council house. I'd managed to stave the council off as well from taking the house. And so we got back to his house. And yeah, but a lot of people were still, you know, trapped in these care homes. Loved ones weren't able to get them out. When we got back, my dad suffered from like survivor's guilt. He started saying to me, "Do you think I should go back? They'll be missing me." And I said, "Well, do you want to go back?" He said, "No, but what about all the others? Can you get them out?" And I'm like, No, I can't get them out. Their families are going to have to do that." So he felt guilty that he'd escaped, you know, which was bizarre. But he settled back in, but he never really quite got over the sort of anxiety and depression they had developed as a result of being imprisoned in that care home. So that was really sad. And I went to the newspapers with all these stories. In fact, the first one was, apart from the care home stories for the Telegraph, um, it must have been May 2020 when I first discovered about that my dad had this DNR in place. I contacted the Telegraph and they said, "Yeah, we need to run that story." I'd spoken to a whistleblower doctor at that point who said, "Yeah, these DNRs are being put on everyone." She said, "I work in a hospital." She worked in a hospital in London, and she said people are getting these do not resuscitate orders if they're over 50. She said if they've got mental health issues. She said there was a young woman with schizophrenia. They put one on her. There was they put them on autistic children. It's like eugenics in full swing. They were putting them on anyone that they deemed was not worthy of saving, I suppose. That's the only way I could look at it. So I wrote this article for the Telegraph. They never published it, and I thought, what's going on here? You know, um, they never tell you why. They just say, "Oh, sorry, it's we're not using it now," and send it back to you and don't pay you, even though they've commissioned you. That's how it works these days in journalism. Sorry, I've got a very croaky voice today. I talk a lot.
That's
So
fine.
yeah, so I did approach then I approached some newspapers. So the news editor on the Daily Mail and the medical editor on the Mail on Sunday. I met them in person and I brought with me a man with a big file of incontrovertible evidence that his father had been killed in an NHS facility. And at first they didn't believe us, but within an hour or so, their jaws were on the floor, you know. They were like, "This is massive. They're killing people in hospital. Even if they've killed just one person in hospital, it's a big story, you know.
Yeah, of
But
course.
looks like it's hundreds or maybe more." So the first guy took the file. We did copy files for them back to his office, said he'd be in touch. Obviously, he never got in touch again. I did chase and chase and chase and never got to speak to him again. The second guy said he was very interested in speaking to some of the people that had told me their stories. So he contacted about 5 of them, chatted to them, then came back to me and said that there's just not enough evidence to support it, which was bizarre because he had written a story himself for the Mail on Sunday in July 2020, talking about this very thing, asking the question, were people in care homes being given overdoses of sedatives? That's why I contacted him. I thought he's the man. So he was able to write that article with no evidence whatsoever. And now I've given him a file full of evidence. And I think it was about 20 case studies at that point who were willing to speak to him and be pictured and have their names put in the paper and photographed. He suddenly said there wasn't enough evidence. So I thought there's something going on here. Of course, I didn't know about Operation Taller at that point, and obviously, I really do feel now, although I don't know for certain, that the media were included under that under that umbrella.
Just to interject there, Jackie, for people who don't know, just tell us what Operation Tallow is slash was.
Yeah, so it was a police operation brought in. I think it was at the very start of 2021, actually, that was brought in. And the police were instructed if anyone came to them with a report of a vaccine injury or a vaccine death. When I say vaccine, I mean the mRNA injections that they had rolled out at that point. They rolled them out in December 2020. So it ties in perfectly with that. And also not to investigate that and not to investigate vaccine deaths, not to investigate any reports of deaths like the ones I'd been looking into that had occurred in care homes and hospitals and hospices where families were accusing the hospitals or care homes of involuntarily euthanizing, killing their loved ones. So the police were instructed not to look into all those things, and they didn't. So when people did go to the police, and I went to the police myself, unfortunately, when my dad was actually killed as well at home, which I've got spoke to people, other people who've had loved ones killed at home, but they're few and far between. I know of about 3 or 4, but most of the killings happen in the hospitals and care homes. And I know the police with my case, they kind of pretended that they were going to investigate it. When I chased them up, they just said, "We've done the investigation, we're closing the case, nothing to see here, everything's fine." And same happened to all the other people I know who actually reported it to the police. They were dismissed, just brushed away, and told to go report it to the hospitals and not to come to the police, although it was nothing to do with them. So, and in my case, the police said the reason I said, "You haven't even taken a statement from me. I wasn't actually there when it happened. I was on my way there." The police person said to me, "No, we don't need a statement from you because it would just be hearsay because you weren't in the room when it happened." And I was like, "But most murders, there's not a witness in the room when it happens, but you still investigate." It didn't make any sense at all. And other people were brushed off with similar excuses. And oh God, sorry, didn't even realize that was on. So yeah, this was the problem. People were just dismissed, and when you're in that state as well, when you've just lost a loved one in such a horrendous way, you're not in a very good state of mind, And I was coping with this all on my own with my dad. No other family got involved, and you end up just feeling just very alone, and you're grieving, except you can't grieve properly. As anyone who's had a loved one murdered will know, you never grieve properly until you get justice, until you find out what really happened, until you get justice for the murdered person, for the victim. I've now got nearly 200 people in my support group, and that is just the tip of the iceberg. Most people don't want to join a support group, but I've spoken to, I would say, over 1,000 people with near identical stories. In fact, when I realized that the papers were not going to run any of these stories, I thought, well, let's make it into a film. So my first film I made with Iconic Media, which is run by Jamie Ike, David's son.
Yep.
We did a film in the summer of 2021 called A Good Death, ? Which is about exactly all the stuff I've just been telling you. And we went and interviewed people in their homes, heard their stories, spoke to experts, and put it into a film, which I think is one of their most watched films, actually.
Was just to interject again, I've got a question about that. Was John O'Looney featured in there?
No, he wasn't. I'd heard of John at that point. We didn't start speaking until probably
Oh,
later.
you do know him then, yeah?
I know John really well. I mean,
Yeah, he's a good
I
bloke.
did a chat show for. Have you spoken to him? Yeah.
Yeah, he's one of my if I say he's one of my early interviews. I spoke to him at some point in 2025. I want to say 3 or 4 months ago, but my understanding of times
Yeah.
a bit squee whiff. I still think that I was at university a year ago. I wasn't.
I know exactly what you mean. I mean, there's been a lot of talk on social media about how time has changed, how it's slowing down, then speeding up. And when you say, all this started 7 years ago, everyone's like, what? No, it was? Surely it's only 2 or 3 years ago. Yeah, it just seems like yesterday, doesn't it? Well, with a trauma.
It's I think someone once said because I studied nursing and my degree is in mental health,
Oh,
but
okay.
I remember someone said to me we were having a discussion while we were at university. I'm going off a slight tangent, but roll with me on this as we're talking about time. When you're young, there's lots of milestones that you hit, so time doesn't move as quickly because you'll have like your fifth birthday, your first tooth, your first love, your first day of school, blah 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 blah. And then when you hit adulthood, you get your first job, and then you hit your 30s, then you hit your 40s. Like, whereas our lifetime at the moment, while we've been adults, we've had terrorist attacks in September the 11th. We've had the October the 7th thing. We've had COVID. We've had potentially on the horizon. We've got a potential World War III. We've had a monarch in the UK die. We've had a global pandemic, whether people believe that or not. We've had the optics of it. So we've had constant milestones. There's
Yeah.
been no let up. There's been no gap between them. So I think that's why time seems to have shifted slightly different.
Well, sometimes it goes really slow, and sometimes you can't even remember what day it is, or which way up. I think everyone has really changed as well. I've written a lot about this on social media and in articles. I wrote an article yesterday on Substack called "The Church of COVID." Could be because even though people can now see what it really was, they're still devoted to it, and they still talk about COVID almost in a fond sort of way now. I know people just locally who still talk about it and still live by the rules almost, and would
Mhm.
don a mask and do social distance. Um,
I
do,
worked in a hospital at the time when COVID was, if I say when COVID was a thing, and I think I was probably the worst person to be in a hospital. It's like, Dean, forever being told, Dean, put your mask on. Oh, yeah, sorry. Don't cover your beard with it. Sorry, it's just dangling here. Or,
yeah,
um,
literally.
yeah, I used to pick up loads of overtime because everyone was obviously concerned. I think for me, when COVID hit, like everyone, I was sort of caught up in the tsunami of information and news and propaganda about it. But I remember I was downstairs in the living room watching a BBC report about it. Um, and I've told this story many a time. I think it's on my interview with John Looney. I said the same thing. There's a camera panning across what you assume is a city in China. There's not very many people about, and every so often someone just sort of drops almost like they're dead. And I remember saying to my wife, I'm not buying this now. She's like, why? It's like, well, I know we're not overly huge fans of Shaun of the Dead, but there's a bit where he's on the bus, and it stops at a bus stop, and then the woman just randomly just drops dead and becomes a zombie. I'm like, people in China aren't becoming zombies, but it's almost this tacky level of, oh look, just to show you what's happening. And then I think the final straw, our youngest child, had a bit of a cold. And I'm talking he was 18 months, and they made me do a COVID test on him. I nearly got into a fist fight with a guy at a test center because of it, because I pulled up in the car and went, are you here to do a test? Oh, I'm not here for the fucking weather, am I? And me being me, and he's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'm like, go on in, go on, I can get out of the car. Like, you know what I mean? I shouldn't have been like that at the time. He was probably sort of caught up in it all like the rest of us. But between the BBC thing that I saw, and having to do that to my youngest, no, that for me was my sort of off switch. I don't buy this anymore.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I knew what was going on from the start. It was like, Mr. Pandemic, I've been expecting you. Maybe not this early, but come on in. Let's see how this is going to work. I mean, I've always been a very questioning, suspicious person anyway by nature. My dad told me that the moon landings weren't real when I was 7, so when it was actually happening, or allegedly happening. So I need to ask questions, to look at things from a different angle. I also watched Event 201 in October, November 2019, which just spelled it out. This is what we're going to do, and it's going to come soon. And then when it started, I thought they'd do it a bit different, but no, it was pretty much identical to the blueprint that they'd already laid out. And then of course I was very aware of Operation Lockstep back in 2010. If you have a look at that, it's spelling out what's going to happen in the a faux pandemic, shall we say. And I was just laughing, thinking, oh my God, they're doing it exactly as they said they're going to do it. And it was a bit of a shock that it happened so suddenly. Um, but apart from that, I was just laughing. I shouldn't have been, because some people were genuinely scared. But I just was saying to everyone from the start, don't worry about it. It's nothing. It's all fabricated to get people scared, and it's all about control. And they're going to bring in digital ID. They're going to bring in, cashless society, all this kind of stuff that we all knew about. I say we all, millions of us knew about it, but millions more didn't. and were literally sucked in by something that there was absolutely no evidence of. I don't watch TV. I don't have a TV. But I still obviously heard about it. But I think if nobody had a TV or a radio and nobody had social media, they wouldn't have noticed anything different because there wasn't anything different. And if there really was an airborne virus killing people, no one would step outside the door. I think a lot of people were really enjoying. No one would send their kids out to school if they thought they were going to be killed by an airborne virus. And if these so-called viruses are airborne, we'd all be dead a long time ago. The human race wouldn't have survived that. So, and it was hilarious. Just all the rules and regulations were just so funny. I have a local friend, and she said, the school's shut down. Then the kids aren't allowed to go to school. And she said, I'm not having that. So she just continued to send her kids to school. And when they said, you can't send your kids into school, it's just for the children of essential workers, she said, well, I'm an essential worker. And they went, oh, okay then.
Yeah. I always found it funny. You've got to wear a mask to walk through the door of a restaurant. You've got to wear a mask, but when you sit down, you can take it off.
Oh, we had to. So I went to the pub with 6 friends, and a girl at the door said, "Oh, she worked in the pub." She said, "Oh, you need to wear a mask." And I said, "Well, we're just going to sit at that table there by the door." And she said, "Well, you need to put on a mask when you walk to the table." I said, "None of us wear masks." She said, "Are you exempt?" And I said, "Yes, we all met at the Society for the Exemption of Masks Wearers Society." And she went, "Oh, really? Okay, then come in."
It's funny actually. We're mocking sort of the COVID era. Even do you know David Cartland?
Yeah, I know him well. I was just on the phone to him the other day. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah. In my interview with him, he said like they wouldn't let him into a pub because he didn't have a mask on. So went back to the car, found the dirtiest one he could find in the footwell, put that on, and even though it was filthy, they were like, "Oh, mask, yeah, in you come." It's like I
I,
remember saying to my mother because she had the visor thing. I was like, "Do you think if I've got COVID and I'm stood here?" And I cough, it's going to go, oh shit, we've got better go around the front or we better not go underneath. Like, come on. And some people, like other people I made that comment to, were kind of like, I don't know what you mean. I'm like, well, it's not just going to go here, is it? It's got all this gap to get to your nose and you, I just,
to me, that all that stuff was really obvious, and to a lot of people, it was really obvious. So, what was the point in following the rules? It was a pain. I made up some flyers and distributed them locally to tell all the local shop and bar owners that they weren't to ask people about why they weren't wearing masks. They could get a fine for that. Showed them the government website thing that actually said that. Most of them were really grateful. They'd start by saying, "Oh, could you put a mask on?" And I was like, "I don't wear a mask. I will not wear a mask. I'll never wear a mask." "Oh, well, you can't come in there." "Yes, yes, I can come in." So it was tiring explaining the same thing over and over. And obviously, I'd take my dad out as well, and we'd go into shops and into the bank and stuff. And it was just constant. My dad's going, "Why are they talking about masks?" And I said, "Oh, don't worry about it, Dad. Just ignore them. They're just being silly." And and I just continued like that. But it was a bit draining having to explain the same thing over and over. That's why I came up with the idea of a leaflet. So if someone had said anything, I could just say, "Have a read of that." And most of the cafe, pub, and restaurant owners were grateful. They said, "God, we didn't even know that. Thanks so much." Because at that point, someone had been successfully sued by a disabled person who'd been asked the question, and it had made them feel uncomfortable. They didn't want to share their medical details with a stranger, and I think it was a restaurant had to pay out. I think they paid 7.5 grand out of court. So I just said to all the small businesses around here, "You can't afford that. So if someone comes in without a mask, don't say anything. Just leave them alone. They've obviously got a reason." My reason was that it was ridiculous, and I wouldn't do that. I just wouldn't. Maybe my self-esteem is unnaturally high. I don't know, but I'm not going to muzzle myself and cover my face. I remember sitting on the train and being the only person without a mask, and I felt naked. It was a very weird feeling. But just to make it even worse, I got a mirror out of my bag and a lipstick and started like putting on this red lipstick, just like make look. I'm even emphasizing the bigger.
yeah, absolutely. Look at me.
Yeah. But it was, well, I did feel like the odd one out a lot. But then you'd see like on the tube station in London, because I do go up to London quite a bit, while I was living in London at the time. Um, you see all these things saying, you know, that there's germs everywhere and don't touch the handrails going up and down the escalators. And now there's a million signs saying, make sure you hold on to the handrails. So my question was back there, and I used to do posts daily on every single aspect of what was going on. Um, my question was back then, how many accidents occurred because people weren't holding on to the hand? I know my friend James fell down an escalator head over heels around that time, but that was because he was drunk. But you know, how many people actually tripped and fell because they were too terrified to touch the rail, you know? And now there's signs everywhere saying the opposite. And likewise, you know, before the whole mask thing, if you went into the bank with a mask on, you'd probably be arrested.
Yeah, that's
But
it.
then they're saying at the door, put a mask on. And now, if you go into a bank with your face covered, you'd with one of those blue surgical masks, they'd probably tell you to take it off. So the whole thing was just absolutely unreasonable and ridiculous. And I did laugh, but it was absolutely draining and exhausting talking to the people who were believing it all and falling for it and sticking to the rules. And they would do it all again. And I've always said as well that I think a huge amount of people really enjoyed it. They loved the whole thing and they would definitely love to do it again.
I
Especially
think a lot of people are on a power trip.
not just that, I mean, the people who were being bossed around enjoyed it. They got time at work, people with proper jobs, you know, they got paid to stay at home and sit in their garden drinking Chardonnay because we had nice weather at the start. Do you remember? That was
I gotta admit, one of us got COVID, um, and we did, because I think it was my wife got it. Yes, it was my wife. I got it much later, but the weather was beautiful. My wife caught COVID according to the tests that we had to do and things like that. And obviously, because we lived together, I then had to have time off. The kids were off. We spent that entire time in the garden. It was
yeah.
wonderful. What a nice summer! And because no, I'm not praising lockdown, but we had nice weather and it was quiet. It was like living in a little village, even though I live in a city.
Wasn't it lovely for people who had jobs and who were getting furloughed and who had gardens? It wasn't so lovely for people who lived on the fifth floor with five kids
Absolutely.
and no money. And it wasn't lovely for self-employed people. I had
Nope.
literally no money. My dad was supporting me at the start because I couldn't earn any money. Nobody wanted my articles because all my articles were counter narrative. In fact, the very first article I sent out was about how COVID had been downgraded because that happened in March 2020. They downgraded it, saying it wasn't highly infectious disease. And I thought I'm going to get that story out to all the papers just to make all the people who are worried about it feel better. And not a single paper were interested. That's when I knew for sure they don't want to make people reassured. They don't want to reassure them and make them feel better. They want to keep them in a state of fear. And this was very, very clear to me right from the start that that's what was going on. And they successfully did that for a couple of years.
It
Um,
did seem like that, yeah. I mean, I remember having a bit of an argument with my charge nurse and saying, "Look, I haven't got it. I've done three of these PSR, no,
PCR.
PCR tests, and they're all clear. Just because I'll sleep in a different room as long as I come back into work. Because my ward, we lost. I think it was like just over a third or two-thirds of the workforce because people started quote unquote, working from home. People were scared of catching it. People were at high risk, all these reasons. I was just like, I'll just carry on normal. I'll pick up a load of overtime. It'll do well for me.
Yeah.
But again, yeah, the other side of the coin is it's all right for me. I have got a garden, but there's people in flats and not far from where I live, I'm thinking, because I used to have to go past it, like, oh, those poor buggers in that tower block. All they can do is open the window. They can't even go and enjoy the green areas around the tower block, you
Yeah,
know?
they followed the rules, but they didn't have to follow the rules, and they didn't even realize that because the telly told them. They stayed indoors and did as they were told. There was a point a couple of years ago where the government was saying we didn't order the schools to close down. We left it to the discretion of individual head teachers, and the head teachers chose to close the school down, which is the truth. The government are totally covered in this. So with the stuff I've been investigating, with the murders going on in hospitals and care homes, you know, we'd say it's the government's fault because they brought in a protocol, NG163, which is the NICE guideline, back in April 2020, and all the doctors and nurses and medics were operating under this protocol. And this protocol was killing people. And when Matt Hancock was about to approve it, he put it in front of a board of 2 professors and 9 doctors to say, what do you think of this guideline? Is it going to work? They all said unanimously, no, you cannot use this protocol because it will kill people. It was identical to the Liverpool Care Pathway, which was a policy that was abolished in 2014 for being too barbaric. It involved the withdrawal of food, the withdrawal of fluids, the administration of end-of-life drugs,
midazolam, yeah.
or any benzodiazepine with an opioid, which should never be used together. The 2 of those things used together causes a depression in the respiratory system to the point of death, right? So why were they giving, this was a COVID protocol, so anyone who came in with, a cough or whatever, or sometimes with nothing, they would put them on this pathway. I called it a death pathway, NG163, for COVID, to treat COVID. Why were they treating COVID with drugs that depress the respiratory system if they're treating a respiratory disease? It makes no sense.
No,
and
exactly.
Very few people survive this pathway, same as the Liverpool Care Pathway. Almost everyone put on NG163 died through an overdose of benzodiazepines and opioids used concomitantly. If you look in to official sources, you can find quite easily that these 2 medications should never be used together because it's too dangerous. Yet they were using it as a treatment for COVID. In America, they used remdesivir, which was also killing people by destroying their kidneys. They knew from previous trials that it would do this, yet Anthony Fauci brought it in as a COVID protocol as well out there. So it was happening all over the world. It wasn't just happening here. And it started to become more and more apparent. And it's still going on, not as much as it was in 2020 and 2021, but it is still happening. I'm still adding people to my group on a weekly basis, people coming to me saying, I think my mother's just been killed in hospital. And said that they say they don't use NG163 anymore. Why not? What was wrong with it? They renamed it NG191 in March 21 to try and throw people off the scent, but it was still pretty similar. And then in November that year, they actually removed the bit where it says to give midazolam and morphine. So they were desperately covering it up because they knew what this protocol had done, and nobody's been held accountable for that. And at least 100,000 people died. I'd say it's more because a lot of people died and their loved ones put it down to COVID, or they put it down to, oh, they had cancer, or they put it down to, a heart attack or whatever. But a lot of those deaths were actually these pathway deaths, I believe, and were never reported. So what we're seeing is just the tip of the iceberg. My book has got 42 stories in it. They're first person accounts. It was a silent genocide happening in the hospitals. I just read that on the back of the book. That's the blurb I wrote on the back. A silent genocide is happening in UK hospitals, hospices and care homes. And thousands of the most vulnerable members of our society, people who are elderly, frail, or ill. And, I don't know if you've been in hospital as a patient, you do feel very vulnerable when you're lying prone in a bed and you're relying on people to get things for you and do things for you. It's very hard to say no in a lot of those situations. But I don't know if you read the book, but the stories are horrendous. They're absolutely horrendous. And a lot of people have said to me they can only read like 1 a week, or, because it's too much to take. One is enough, and then never mind 42. And I've got hundreds more. I could do 5 more books filled with the same kind of stories.
And we'd have 5 more interviews, I think. I think anyone interested in the situation around COVID, midazolam, people dying in care settings, hospitals, whatever sort of under that umbrella, I think your book should be first choice for people to read. Now, I appreciate you've given me quite a bit of your time today, Jackie. So we've talked about the book as well as COVID and a few other things. So my last question is, where can people find the book? Where's the best place for them to get it?
Well, I'll be giving you a link, so hopefully that will pop up below, and then
I'll put it down below, yeah.
Yeah, it is available on Amazon, but the publisher doesn't like people buying it through Amazon because we don't have access to the data, and it's just so we like to see how many is being sold and stuff like that, you know. So and also it's Amazon, you know. So if you can buy it via the link, it'll be good. And you can watch A Good Death, which was my first film. That's on Rumble under on the Iconic channel. I did a second film called Playing God. That's also on Rumble. That's about medical democide in the UK over the last 50 years, a bit of a broader look at it all, and covers all kinds of horrible stories. And then I made a third film last year, it came out in July last year. That's called Unseen. That's on YouTube, amazingly. It hasn't been taken down yet, which is just more of the same, basically. And I'm also working on a new film about organ donation, organ harvesting, and the controversy around brain death. And I'm crowdfunding for that at the moment, so I can send you the link for that as well.
Absolutely happy to put them in the description.
So thank you.
No, not a problem. Jackie, thank you ever so much for your time today, and I look forward to doing it again soon.
Thanks, Dean. See you soon. Bye bye.